My name is Eleanor. I am 68 years old, and the heaviest thing I own is not the immense, vaulted ceiling of this rambling Tudor revival, but the suffocating weight of my guilt. Every polished piece of mahogany, every heavy velvet drape, echoes the silence of my husband, Charles, who has been gone for 3 years. The house, our masterpiece, was supposed to be a warm shell for our family legacy. Instead, it has become a cold, calculating instrument in the hands of the children we raised. I lived by a desperate, toxic rule, my defining thesis: a mother's peace is worth any lie. I lied to keep the silence. I lied about my lingering grief. And most critically, I lied about the location and status of the one thing they truly desired: the house deed, the final, tangible piece of Charles. I figured if I kept the truth hidden, I could maintain the illusion of family and they wouldn't leave me completely alone to face the silence. But my lie was costly. It had fostered an entitlement in my son, Marcus, that was now massive and predatory. Marcus, a man whose ambition was only exceeded by his catastrophic failure in a cryptocurrency venture, was facing personal ruin. And Veronica, his wife, was the cold, sharp mind guiding his desperation. The confrontation came not with a bang, but with a quiet, calculated clinking of silverware during their mandatory Sunday dinner. I had spent 2 hours preparing the meal, a futile ritual of a mother trying to feed a connection that had long since starved. We sat in the dining room, surrounded by the beautiful antiques Charles and I had collected, pieces they had already mentally tagged for auction. Marcus ate quickly, avoiding my gaze, but Veronica was deliberate. She dabbed her mouth delicately with a napkin, set it down, and gave me that familiar, saccharine look of false, clinical concern. If you're still here, welcome to Voice of Jenna, a place where stories aren't just told, they're felt. Here, we dive into real emotions, family drama, quiet heartbreaks, unexpected twists, and the moments that change us. So sit back, relax, and let me tell you what happened next. Eleanor, darling, Marcus and I were just discussing the security of the house documents, she began, the word security sounding less like protection and more like possession. With all the market volatility and, frankly, your recent forgetfulness, it just makes sense to ensure the deed is protected. We know you kept it in the old safe, the one Charles built into the wall of the library. Marcus, the passive-aggressive muscle of the operation, leaned forward, his voice heavy with feigned sincerity. Mom, we need the combination. Just for our records. As your executors, it's really just procedural. You know, to ease your burden. I looked at my son, the boy I had tucked into bed, the man who is now sitting across from me, demanding the very last piece of his father's legacy, as if it were a bill he was finally entitled to collect. He didn't see me. He saw an obstacle blocking a $15 million check. Oh, the safe, I replied, deliberately vague, trying to summon the persona of the frail, scatterbrained widow. Yes, Charles was quite old-fashioned about security. I believe the deed is still in there. It's certainly the safest place for it. And the combination? Veronica pressed, her voice suddenly sharp and impatient. Could you just jot it down for Marcus? We can file it with Robert Vaughn, your lawyer. Just in case. That phrase, just in case, sliced through my carefully constructed composure. Just in case I fell ill. Just in case I became completely dependent. Just in case they decided it was time for me to move to a place where I no longer had access to my personal safe. They were not asking for a number. They were asking for the clock on my autonomy. My heart was hammering so loudly, I was sure they could hear it. The lie came naturally, a lifetime of practice. The combination is rather complicated, dear. I think it's a mix of our first address and my mother's birthday. I'll have to find the old instruction sheet for you. When things settle down, I promised them access to the deed eventually. For the moment, they accepted the delay, satisfied that the deed was safely inside the house, just requiring a combination I was too forgetful to recall immediately. I served the simple apple crumble, the sugar and cinnamon a bitter counterpoint to the mounting dread. My thesis had held, but the piece was paper-thin. As I cleared the plates, the final, decisive blow landed. I was in the kitchen, washing a crystal glass, when I heard Veronica's voice, no longer using the conversational volume of a dinner guest, but the low, conspiratorial whisper of a co-conspirator. "He's not a predator, Eleanor. He's the most trusted geriatric consultant in the city," she whispered fiercely to Marcus. "We simply need his professional opinion on your competence before the end of the month. If we wait, you'll lose the house to the creditors. You have to understand, we need to sell the house immediately and force her into the community before your bankruptcy papers are final." I froze, the crystal glass slipping in my soapy hand, but not breaking. It was a complete, clinical plan. They weren't just waiting for the safe combination. They were coordinating my institutionalization. The safe wasn't just a document. It was the final trigger for my immediate removal. The truth hit me with the force of a physical blow. My son saw me as a disposable asset, an obstacle to be managed and filed away. The lie, "A mother's peace is worth any lie," hadn't bought me peace. It had purchased my eviction. The time for enablement was over. I was 68, and I was about to be made homeless by the children I raised. I knew I had to act, not just to protect the deed, but to protect my life from the cruel betrayal that was now a clinical, financial certainty. The deed was in the safe, and I needed to swap it for a different kind of recipe entirely. The confrontation in the dining room, fueled by Veronica's clinical pronouncement, "File the competency papers," was the necessary shock. The lie, the thesis that a mother's peace is worth any lie, had finally collapsed under the weight of their greed. My son and his wife weren't just waiting for the house. They were actively plotting my institutionalization to secure a quick sale. I knew my window was closing. If I gave them the safe combination, they would seize the deed, sell the house, and use the impending bankruptcy of Marcus as legal leverage to force me into a retirement community immediately. The time for vague promises was over. I needed an immediate, decisive counterattack. I retreated to the quiet sanctity of the library, the room that housed the infamous safe. The library safe, the one everyone knew about, was a relic of Charles's theatrical security measures. But its purpose was now clear. It was a decoy. The real, crucial documents were elsewhere. My mind, far from being the forgetful one Veronica accused me of having, was now hyper-focused. The betrayal had triggered a clarity I hadn't possessed since Charles died. My new reality was this: I did not lose my autonomy. I found the courage to expose their theft. I called the only person I trusted who had no financial stake in my estate, Mrs. Gable, my neighbor for 20 years. Mrs. Gable was a sweet, unassuming woman who often helped me with the garden, but she had an iron core of integrity. I called her, not from the main line, but from an old, secure landline in the study. "I need your help, Helen," I whispered, keeping my voice low. "Marcus and Veronica are accelerating their plan. They're coming for the deed, and they're planning to have me declared incompetent next week." I told her the entire, ugly truth. The safe was a decoy. The real plan was to expose their criminality, and that I had decided to protect Charles's legacy by giving the deed to the only person I trusted to uphold the house's value. Mrs. Gable, initially shocked, didn't hesitate. She offered complete loyalty. "Eleanor," she said, her voice steady and firm, "I will do whatever you need to protect that house. Charles built it with his heart." My plan was set, the great recipe swap. I went to the secret location Charles had built, a small, fireproof box hidden behind a loose stone in the fireplace of the master bedroom. Inside, nestled amongst Arthur's war medals and some old love letters, was the original, current deed to the Tudor revival. I took the thick parchment and then walked over to my desk. I pulled out a piece of aged, heavy cardstock, the exact size and weight of the deed itself. On it was written, in my mother's elegant script, her famous recipe for sour cream coffee cake, a recipe so complex and demanding, it was often referred to as Grandma's Challenge. It was a document of immense sentimental value, but zero financial worth. I placed the recipe inside the heavy, manila envelope marked House Deed, and sealed it with a drop of red wax, using an old family crest ring. The meticulous swap was complete. The house deed, my $15 million legacy, was now replaced with a soufflé recipe. I knew Marcus and Veronica wouldn't be able to resist the lure of the deed for long. They would use the combination they planned to steal, perhaps by going through my trash or having a friend hack into my personal files, and they would find the decoy. Their greed would lead them straight into a criminal act. But the swap was only half the plan. The real protection was the legal transfer. I had a crucial task left: securing the real deed permanently. I drove immediately to Robert Vaughn's office, carrying the real parchment. I signed the final, complex papers. The house deed was officially, legally, and permanently transferred to Mrs. Gable under a private contract with a massive, undisclosed sum to be paid to her over time, conditional upon her allowing me lifetime tenancy. The transfer was notarized and submitted to the county recorder's office immediately. I kept a single copy of the notarized transfer receipt. I didn't put it in the decoy safe. I hid it inside the one thing Marcus never noticed: an antique, leather-bound volume of obscure Latin poetry that he found boring. I returned home, the physical deed no longer in my possession, the financial responsibility no longer on my shoulders. I took the envelope with the recipe, went back to the library, and placed it prominently inside the decoy safe, right on top of Charles's antique pocket watch. I knew that soon, Marcus and Veronica would make their move. They would inevitably break the law in their rush to access the wealth they felt entitled to. My home was safe, and my legacy was secure. I had replaced a deed with a recipe, and I was prepared to watch them consume the consequences of their own greed. The house was no longer a symbol of my guilt. It was a testament to their entitlement. I was ready for the inevitable break-in. The legal transfer was complete. I sat in Robert Vaughn's spacious, quiet office, holding the copy of the recorded deed transfer. The one showing the historic Tudor revival now belonged to Helen Gable. The deed that lay safely within the library safe was nothing more than a handwritten recipe for my mother's difficult, temperamental sour cream coffee cake. The sheer audacity of the swap filled me with a cold, clear sense of liberation I hadn't felt in years. I had not just given away a house. I had thrown a wrench into the finely tuned machinery of my children's entitlement. Robert Vaughn, the epitome of cautious professionalism, looked at the final filing receipt with a rare hint of a smile. "Eleanor, you have done the most extraordinary thing. You have not just protected the asset, you have protected yourself from the irrevocable financial power of attorney you signed 2 years ago. When they discover the deed is gone, their panic will be profound. They will move fast, and they will likely move illegally. We simply wait for them to prove our case." "My case is simple, Robert," I told him. "I want to teach my son that theft is not inheritance. I want this to be recorded as a criminal act, not just a property dispute." The house immediately became a theater of mounting tension. Marcus and Veronica knew something was amiss. My continued evasion of the safe combination, always followed by a claim of "I almost found the note, but the cat knocked it behind the radiator," was driving them mad. They had less than a week before the competency papers they planned to file would be ready, and they desperately needed the deed to prove their control over the assets. Their microaggressions escalated into a frantic search for leverage. The first offense came as an inventory. Veronica walked through the house with a small, electronic notepad, ostentatiously photographing every piece of furniture. She wasn't documenting the legacy, she was documenting the collateral. I heard her instructing Marcus in the dining room, "Make sure she sees you cataloging the silver, Marcus. She needs to understand that we are in control now, even if she's being difficult." The implication was clear. If I didn't cooperate, they would start liquidating the contents of the home I was still living in. The second offense was a direct violation of my privacy. I walked into the study to find Marcus rifling through the drawers of my writing desk, pretending to look for a stamp. He was breathless with the exertion of his deceit. "Just clearing up your clutter, Mom," he mumbled, his eyes scanning every envelope. He wasn't looking for a stamp. He was looking for the safe combination or any document that hinted at the transfer. I watched him, cold and still, letting him believe he was being discreet. He left the room empty-handed, but the violation was complete. The third offense was the threat delivered through a third party. My niece called me, sobbing. Eleanor, Marcus told my mother you're losing the house because you've been signing checks to a psychic and transferring large sums to a new, suspiciously close friend. He said the family is having to intervene to save you. They were beginning the public smear campaign, creating the narrative of the delusional widow to justify their impending intervention. I used the quiet hours between their incursions to perform the audit. This wasn't for Robert Vaughn's immediate use, but for my own emotional and legal grounding. I needed to move beyond the emotional pain of betrayal and view their greed as a quantifiable, clinical expense. I spent an entire afternoon creating a spreadsheet, a meticulous log of their parasitic behavior over the past 5 years. The total sum, nearly $650,000 worth of my money spent on preserving their image, shielding them from consequences, and plotting my own downfall, was my final, objective proof. I wasn't the delusional one. They were the meticulously calculating thieves. This audit was the objective fact that proved my sanity and their criminal motive. With the audit compiled, the strategy shifted to setting the trap. I knew they were planning the break-in. They were frantic, cornered animals. I took a small, symbolic measure. I returned to the library and deliberately left the desk drawer that contained the copy of the, now useless, original safe instruction sheet slightly ajar. I also made sure a small, delicate antique silver letter opener was resting prominently near the safe. Marcus was impatient and clumsy. He wouldn't be able to pick the lock. He would use force. The letter opener would be their tool, and it would leave an obvious mark. I finished the day by speaking again with Mrs. Gable. She confirmed she was prepared for the inevitable. The house was hers, and my tenancy was secure. I sat in the parlor that evening, the old Tudor silent and heavy. I didn't fear the upcoming crime. I anticipated it. I knew that the moment Marcus's desperate hands closed around the brass dial of that safe and he applied a legal force, the clock would run out on their freedom, not mine. The recipe for my mother's coffee cake would be the bitterest dish they had ever tasted. I was waiting for the sound of metal protesting under pressure, the sound of my liberation. The meticulously planned swap was complete. The true deed was legally recorded in Mrs. Gable's name, and the decoy deed, my mother's complex, sentimental recipe for sour cream coffee cake, sat waiting in the decoy safe. My primary goal was no longer the defense of the house, but the defense of my autonomy and the careful execution of the trap. The strategic defense was now about creating the ideal conditions for Marcus and Veronica to commit a crime, thereby nullifying any potential legal threat they could leverage against me. I made the final call to Robert Vaughn, confirming the entire chain of events, the swap, the legal transfer, and the existence of the audit. But I had one crucial task remaining, an insurance policy Charles had insisted on years ago, one they knew nothing about: the hidden codicil. I walked to the dusty, rarely used attic. Charles, in his profound wisdom, had anticipated the greed of his own children. He didn't want the house to be the only thing I could protect. He wanted my financial freedom to remain absolute, regardless of their maneuverings. The hidden codicil was not in the library safe, nor was it with Robert Vaughn. It was sealed inside a hollowed-out, plaster garden gnome Charles had stored amongst the Christmas decorations. I retrieved the gnome and broke it open. Inside was a single parchment document, folded many times. The codicil stated that if, at any time, an heir attempted to litigate my mental health, or if any primary asset, like the house, was criminally contested by an heir, the entire liquid remainder of Charles's trust, a substantial $8 million, would immediately be removed from the main estate, deposited into a separate, untraceable private foundation in my name, and designated for charitable causes only, with the sole executive being myself. This was my final leverage. Marcus and Veronica were driven by the $15 million house, but they also coveted the residual $8 million liquid estate. The codicil meant that if they followed through with their threats, the competency papers, the illegal break-in, they wouldn't just lose the house. They would lose every single penny of the liquid inheritance as well. The codicil was the ultimate disincentive. I secured it inside my Latin poetry book, nestled against the deed transfer receipt. The atmosphere in the Tudor was now glacial. Marcus and Veronica had stopped pretending to be concerned children. They saw me as a stubborn obstacle. They had noticed the ajar desk drawer, which was my deliberate lure, and the wheels were turning. The tension peaked on Wednesday evening. They came back unannounced, demanding a final accounting of the house's expenses. "Mom, this isn't difficult," Veronica said, her voice strained by forced patience. "We need to know how much cash you have on hand. It's time to consolidate the finances before the end of the quarter. Where is your checkbook?" I played my role perfectly. I was vague, slightly tearful, and focused on trivialities. "Oh, the checkbook? I think I left it in the garden, dear, near the bird bath." I was admiring the roses. I watched them exchange a look of pure, predatory certainty. My forgetfulness was their green light. They now fully believed I was deteriorating and that they had to intervene for my own good, their toxic justification. I made my final move. I announced I was feeling unwell and was retiring early. I walked slowly up the massive oak staircase, ensuring they heard every creak of my weary steps. I didn't go to my bedroom. I went to the laundry room, which had a small window overlooking the library entrance. I waited in the dark, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. The house was utterly silent, too quiet, the kind of quiet that hides a criminal act. At 1:30 a.m., I heard the faint snick of the library door opening. I crept to the window and looked down. Two figures were silhouetted against the ambient street light filtering through the leaded glass windows. It was Marcus and Veronica. Marcus was bulky and tense. Veronica was pointing a flashlight beam directly at the safe. They were whispering, but I could make out the words. "Hurry. The deed is right there. He said the old lock is weak." Marcus had the antique silver letter opener I had deliberately left out. He wasn't using a locksmith. He was going to use brute force. The inevitable sound came, a sharp, metallic crunch followed by a grinding, sickening tear of metal as the flimsy, decorative safe door was violently bent open. The act was complete. The theft wasn't just attempted, it was achieved. Marcus, panting with exertion and adrenaline, reached inside the dark cavity. He grabbed the single, thick, wax-sealed envelope marked House Deed. He pulled it out, holding it aloft like a trophy of his victory. Veronica turned the flashlight on his face. He was smiling, a wide, triumphant, utterly self-satisfied grin. Cliffhanger number 1. Marcus and Veronica stood there, illuminated by the single beam of the flashlight, the envelope secured in their hands. They had the deed, they had the house, and they had just committed a felony. Marcus raised the envelope to Veronica, his eyes shining with greedy victory. "We did it, V. We're rich. Now let's see the official paper." He started to peel back the red wax seal. Would they open the envelope and reveal the recipe before they were caught? Or would their triumph be shattered by the arrival of the police, who were already on their way, alerted by the silent alarm Robert Vaughn had installed? The metallic crunch from the library was the sound of my liberation. I was hidden in the dark laundry room, watching through the small window as the beam of Veronica's flashlight illuminated the triumphant faces of the thieves. Marcus, panting with adrenaline, held the wax-sealed envelope marked House Deed like a king holding his crown. My phone, placed discreetly on the dryer, vibrated once. It was a text from Robert Vaughn. "Police report initiated. They will be on scene in 3 minutes. Do not approach or intervene. Let them finish the crime." Robert, using the silent alarm I had authorized, had captured the exact moment of the break-in. The recipe revelation was about to happen. Marcus and Veronica were too intoxicated by their victory to notice the police sirens in the distance. Marcus, his movements clumsy with excitement, ripped the red wax seal with his thumb. "We did it, V. We're rich," he exclaimed, his voice a hoarse, giddy whisper. "No more crypto debt. No more waiting for the old lady to sign over. We'll list it tomorrow. Pull it out." Veronica's eyes, usually so calculating, were wide and shining with greed. She reached into the envelope, her fingers closing around the thick, aged parchment within. This was the peak of their triumphant fantasy. She pulled the document out and unfolded it beneath the flashlight beam. The single word she read aloud was not grantee or title, but a confused, What? Marcus snatched the paper from her. He read the elegant, familiar script of my mother, then slowly read the bold, handwritten title at the top. Sour Cream Coffee Cake, Grandma's Challenge. Silence fell over the library, a heavy, suffocating silence of family paralysis. The joy evaporated from their faces, replaced by a mixture of deep confusion and cold, mounting fury. Marcus read the instructions aloud, his voice dropping an octave with every word, as if reading a foreign language. Cream together 1 cup of butter with 2 cups of sugar. Do not overmix. Add 4 ounces of sour cream. Must be room temperature. Dust with cinnamon pecan streusel and bake exactly 40 minutes at 350 degrees. He stared at the paper. Then, he looked at the empty safe. Then back at the paper. The realization, the devastating, hilarious reality that he had risked a felony to steal a baking recipe, washed over him. Veronica's reaction was immediate and terrifying. She didn't scream. She went absolutely still, her eyes narrowing to slits of pure malice. "The deed is gone," she stated, her voice a low, dangerous hiss. She swapped it. She replaced the $15 million with a dessert recipe. That manipulative, crazy old woman. Marcus, finally finding his voice, crumpled the recipe in his hand. He was shaking, the adrenaline of the break-in curdling into rage. This is a setup. This is financial elder abuse. She's destroying legal documents. She's mentally incompetent. He delivered the toxic justification, the core of their moral rot. We need this. The only thing that matters is family assets. She has no right to destroy our inheritance. We saved the house for her. We are the family. The moral high ground, in their twisted view, belonged to them. They were the victims of my erratic behavior, and the recipe was proof of my mental decline. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by the approaching siren. Not a distant wail, but a rapid, deliberate approach. Blue and red light flickered on the library curtains. The police. Veronica gasped, grabbing Marcus's arm. She called them. This is proof of her delusion. We need to frame this. Tell them she attacked us. Tell them she was hoarding cash. But it was too late. The front door slammed open, and I heard the heavy, purposeful steps of the local police patrol. Marcus, in a desperate, final act of self-defense, snatched up a leather-bound book from a nearby table. "I'll find the real one. We'll sue her. We have that old claim, that loan she signed for the car. We'll sue her for every penny she's worth. She won't beat us." They were cornered, panicked, and now facing a criminal charge for felony breaking and entering and criminal damage. They were ushered out of the library in front of the flashing lights, forced to explain why they had violently damaged a safe while holding a sour cream coffee cake recipe. I watched them being escorted out, the crumpled recipe on the floor of the beautiful, ruined library. The moment of triumph was immediate and absolute. I had swapped a deed for a recipe, and in doing so, I had swapped their future for a police report. The ultimate defense was not my sanity, but their crime. The legal battle had shifted instantly from a competency hearing to a criminal defense for them. The house was safe, and the thieves were caught red-handed. I was ready for the next move, the inevitable threat they would leverage to keep me in their grasp. The fight for my autonomy was far from over. The sirens faded, leaving the Tudor in a state of stunned, violated silence. Marcus and Veronica had been escorted away, booked for felony breaking and entering and criminal damage. The evidence was undeniable. A police report detailing the forced entry into the safe, a bent letter opener, and the infamous soufflé recipe, which the police, utterly confused, had logged as document of non-material value found at crime scene. I immediately called Robert Vaughn. I was no longer the enabler. I was the client, clear and decisive. "Robert, they have been arrested. We have the police report. The narrative has shifted. We need to focus on leveraging the felony." Robert, already anticipating the legal fallout, was ecstatic. "Eleanor, this is everything. We don't have to debate your mental state. We debate their criminal intent." They went from civil suit to criminal defense in one night. The guardianship petition is dead in the water. No judge will grant guardianship to a criminal defendant who has attempted to steal the ward's assets. My immediate task was to secure the physical space and the legal leverage. First, I secured the house. Mrs. Gable arrived minutes later, her face pale but her resolve firm. The house was now legally hers, and the insurance claim for the damaged safe was hers to file. This was my symbolic act of separation, proving to myself that the house was no longer my responsibility, but my sanctuary. I gave her the official copy of the deed transfer receipt and the keys to the main estate. Next came the legal defense. The police report, detailing the forced entry and the finding of the recipe, became my ultimate audit, the definitive proof of my sanity and their greed. I spent the next 2 days working with Robert to compile the final filing against them, citing felony theft and criminal damage, proved by the police report, elder financial exploitation, proved by the audit, showing the $650,000 I spent on their bailouts and schemes, coercion and intent to institutionalize, proved by the notes Robert's private investigator had gathered about their plans to file competency papers. The phone call from Marcus came late Friday, hours after his release on bail. He was terrified, his voice stripped of its arrogant entitlement. He sounded like the lost little boy I used to put to bed, but I knew that boy was gone, replaced by a desperate, cornered man. "Mom, please. We need to talk. This is insane. It was a mistake. We weren't trying to steal the deed. We were trying to protect it from you. You replaced a legal document with a recipe. That's absolute proof you're not well. If you don't drop the charges, they'll ruin me." Veronica is talking about leaving. He was now facing immediate bankruptcy and a felony charge. His world was crumbling. I maintained the quiet authority I had finally found. "You committed a crime, Marcus. You broke into my home, and you used illegal force to damage my property." The police report speaks for itself. The deed is no longer in the safe, and it is no longer yours. The time for lies is over. He switched tactics instantly, moving from fear to the ultimate threat they had been holding in reserve. "You think you won? You think you're safe?" he sneered, his voice regaining a desperate edge. "You can keep your stupid house, but you can't keep your bank account." Veronica found something, Mom. She found the promissory note you signed 4 years ago. My blood ran cold. The promissory note. 4 years ago, when Marcus was trying to secure a massive loan for his second failed business, the bank required additional collateral. I, the lifelong enabler, had signed a document agreeing to indemnify his personal debts if his business failed. I had signed it thinking I was helping my child, never anticipating that the debt would become a weapon against me. The business failed, Mom. It's been seized. The bank is calling in the indemnification. You signed it, Eleanor. It's a clean legal obligation, he crowed, a sickening thrill of triumph in his voice. The bank is demanding $1.2 million immediately. If you don't pay it off by the end of the month, you'll be personally bankrupted, and the house, the one you gave to your little friend Mrs. Gable, will have a massive, unavoidable judicial lien placed against it. The new owner will inherit your debt. You won't just lose your savings, you'll destroy Mrs. Gable's life, too. He had played his final card. The battle was no longer over the deed or the safe. It was an existential threat against my financial solvency and the life of my only true ally, Mrs. Gable. I was legally and personally obligated to pay off his staggering debt or face immediate, personal bankruptcy. The lie had finally come full circle, binding me to his failure. The trap had sprung, but I was caught in the final, complex snare of his debt. My autonomy was once again hanging by a thread. I had to pay the price of his debt, or lose everything I had fought to protect. The battle had escalated from a property dispute to an existential threat against my entire financial autonomy. Marcus's desperate phone call, revealing the promissory note he coerced me into signing 4 years prior, had landed like a guided missile. I was personally liable for his $1.2 million debt. If I failed to pay, I would face immediate bankruptcy, and the new owner of the house, Mrs. Gable, would inherit a massive judicial lien, effectively ruining her life too. My heart didn't sink. It hardened. This was the final, vicious traps sprung by the enabler's past mistakes. My antithesis line: I did not lose my autonomy. I found the courage to expose their theft, was now tested against the ultimate financial consequence. I immediately contacted Robert Vaughn, who was already dealing with the fallout of the safe break-in. I relayed the thread about the promissory note, providing the approximate date and the bank details. Eleanor, this is sophisticated, Robert admitted, his professional composure briefly strained. He's leveraging your guilt and your loyalty to Mrs. Gable. A judicial lien would paralyze the house and ruin Helen's solvency. We have to fight the note, but that's a long court battle. We need immediate, absolute leverage that is utterly beyond his reach. We need the hidden codicil, I stated. The one Charles set up to protect the liquid assets in case of criminal contest. I raced back to the cottage, retrieved the plaster garden gnome, and handed the sealed, parchment codicil to Robert's trusted courier. The codicil stipulated that any criminal contestation of assets, which the police report detailing the felony break-in proved, would immediately divert the $8 million liquid trust into a charitable foundation I controlled. This was the pivotal, powerful moment of legal jujitsu. Marcus thought he had trapped me with a $1.2 million debt. I was about to respond by dissolving his entire $8 million inheritance pool. Meanwhile, Marcus and Veronica, frantic over the criminal charges, decided on their final, most aggressive move, the physical confrontation/invasion. They knew they couldn't come back to the house. The TRO citing criminal intent was still active. Instead, they stalked me. They found me early Saturday morning at the local farmer's market, where I had gone to buy fresh produce, a small, simple pleasure they had always ridiculed. Veronica cornered me near the flower stall, her face pale with fury and the stress of her impending criminal charges. Marcus stood a few feet back, looking both menacing and utterly pathetic. Eleanor, this is over, Veronica hissed, shoving a certified copy of the promissory note into my hand. The bank has confirmed the debt. You owe $1.2 million. You have 72 hours. If you don't wire the funds, your entire savings will be seized, and we will publicly file a lawsuit that will destroy your credibility and ruin your little friend, Helen Gable. It was a direct violation of my sanctuary, not my home, but my personal space and freedom of movement. They were using coercion and public shame to force my compliance. I looked down at the debt note, then up at Veronica. The woman I once feared was reduced to a desperate bully. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. You are correct, Veronica, I said, my voice steady, attracting the attention of a few neighboring shoppers. I did sign that document, and I will honor the debt. It is the final, colossal cost of my enablement. Marcus stepped forward, a look of triumph briefly flashing across his face. So you'll pay? Drop the charges, and we'll drop the suit. This was the moment of my liberation. I pulled the final, signed document from my handbag, a letter addressed to the bank's legal department. I will not drop the charges, Marcus. You committed a felony, and you must face the consequences, I declared, my voice ringing with authority. But I will pay the debt. Not with my savings, which are fully protected. I will pay it with your inheritance. I handed him the letter. It wasn't a check. It was a notice from Robert Vaughn's office, confirming the activation of the hidden codicil. The letter stated that due to his criminal acts and the civil suit threat, the entire remaining $8 million liquid estate had been irrevocably transferred to the Charles and Eleanor Sterling Charitable Foundation. The promissory note for $1.2 million will be settled by the new foundation on Monday morning, I explained, meeting his shocked gaze. You will be debt-free, Marcus. But you will have spent the first $1.2 million of an inheritance you forfeited the right to touch. The remaining $6.8 million will fund scholarships and local arts programs, the legacy Charles truly intended. The color drained from his face. Veronica snatched the letter, reading the lawyer's signature with rising horror. They hadn't just lost the house and the felony case. They had annihilated their entire future inheritance pool by triggering the codicil. I had defended my autonomy using my new legal threat, a weapon they didn't know existed. Veronica dropped the promissory note and crumpled to the ground. You ruined us. You gave everything away, she shrieked. No, I replied, taking a step back. I taught you the final, most expensive lesson. Entitlement has consequences. I turned and walked away, leaving the $1.2 million debt note and the two defeated thieves behind me. The climax of the direct confrontation was complete. I was debt-free, criminally vindicated, and autonomously in control of my financial destiny. The confrontation at the farmer's market was the final, devastating blow to Marcus and Veronica's leverage. I had stripped them of their inheritance and defanged the promissory note by paying it with money they could no longer touch. They were left with nothing but a looming felony charge, a massive debt that was now settled by my foundation, and a bitter, humiliating defeat. But the most challenging aspect of this war was not financial or legal. It was the emotional residue, the years of family paralysis I had endured, and the need for emotional closure. I spent the next 48 hours with Robert Vaughn, finalizing the dissolution of the entire legal entanglement. The final decision was issued not by a court, but by the legal reality I had constructed. The judge presiding over the civil matters was presented with the police report, the audit, and the confirmation of the promissory note settlement by the charitable foundation. The result was a quick and quiet dismissal of all claims Marcus and Veronica had against me. They were left only with the consequences of their criminal actions. My final act in this legal drama was my symbolic act of separation. I would not just leave the house. I would formally and visibly pass the legacy to the true heir. I returned to the Tudor revival, not as the owner, but as a long-term tenant, utterly free from financial responsibility. I found Mrs. Gable standing in the beautifully maintained garden, pruning the roses Charles and I had planted decades ago. She looked at me, her eyes shining with emotion. "It's beautiful, Eleanor," she whispered, looking up at the sprawling structure. "I will protect it as if it were Charles himself." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the set of antique, heavy brass keys, the main set for the house, which Charles had always carried. I placed them in her hand. "They're yours now, Helen," I said. "And the house is truly yours. My life here is secure, but the ownership is yours. You have the right to ask me to leave if I ever become a burden, though I trust that won't happen." This physical transfer of the keys, a simple, tactile moment, was the liberation. It solidified the shift in power. My old life as the caretaker of an asset they desired was over. I was now a free woman living in a friend's house. Helen immediately provided the emotional validation I needed. She gently squeezed my hand, looking me straight in the eye. "Eleanor, when you signed that deed over to me, I knew you were doing it to protect this house from ruin. But you did something far more profound. You showed me that you weren't the frail, forgetful woman they painted. You were a lioness protecting her den. You didn't swap a deed for a recipe to be cruel. You did it to force the truth to the surface. You saved yourself." Her words confirmed the truth I had struggled to accept. My decisive action was not a sign of mental instability, but of ultimate, clear-eyed strength. The recipe wasn't just a trap. It was a profound act of self-assertion, replacing a meaningless legal document with a symbol of love, history, and the simple pleasures they had discarded. My new life began immediately, structured around the vivid list of simple, genuine joys I had craved for years. The garden. I spent my mornings with Mrs. Gable, planning the annual spring planting. We worked, talked, and laughed, an honest, genuine labor I had always missed. The kitchen. I began baking again, perfecting the very sour cream coffee cake from the famous recipe. It became a shared ritual with Helen, a symbol of our new, real connection. The foundation. I worked with Robert Vaughn, dedicating my time and the $6.8 million from the trust to the Sterling Foundation, funding local business education, specifically for children of working-class families who understood the value of earning wealth, not inheriting it. My final monologue was delivered to the empty library, to the ruined safe, a final moment of reflection and wisdom. I spent decades believing the lie, a mother's peace is worth any lie. I traded truth for calm, and in doing so, I taught my children that my money was free and my dignity was cheap. That lie nearly cost me my life and the inheritance of my home. I looked at the damaged safe, now a monument to their failure. But the lie failed. The swap of the deed for the recipe, the filing of the codicil, and the enforcement of the criminal charges, these were not acts of revenge. They were acts of self-reclamation. My truth is this, my antithesis is final. I did not lose my autonomy. I found the courage to expose their theft. They inherited a debt they could never repay, and I inherited a life I finally owned. The price of their greed was their inheritance. The price of my freedom was simply the courage to stop lying. I closed the door gently on the library. I was Eleanor and I was free. The recipe was baked, and the house was at peace. The payment of the promissory note by the newly established charitable foundation was the final, definitive move in the battle for my autonomy. The $1.2 million debt, the last, most treacherous financial snare Marcus had laid, was settled, not with my money, but with his lost inheritance. The entire $8 million liquid estate was now dedicated to Charles's true legacy, unreachable by his entitled son. The immediate effect was Marcus and Veronica's collapse. Their legal and financial leverage was zero. They were facing criminal charges for the safe break-in, and the hidden codicil had dissolved their inheritance. But their surrender was not immediate. It was a slow, sputtering descent into desperation. Their next, futile maneuver was the last attempt at emotional and legal blackmail, the final petition. They couldn't refile the competency papers directly. The police report detailing their felony ruled them out as credible petitioners. Instead, they convinced a distant, elderly cousin, who knew nothing of the situation except the smear campaign about my psychic payments, to file a petition for temporary custody of the assets, arguing that the recent reckless, self-defeating financial maneuvering, i.e., paying off Marcus's debt with a charitable trust, proved I was no longer capable of managing the estate. The legal grounds were weak, but the intent was clear. They wanted to freeze the foundation's funds and drag me back into court, hoping to exhaust me financially and emotionally. The existential threat was no longer the loss of my home or my money. It was the threat of endless litigation, the erosion of my peace. I was fighting for the right to simply live my life without constant legal harassment from the thieves I raised. I was safely at the mountain cottage, working with Robert Vaughn via encrypted lines. Robert recognized the danger of fatigue. "They can't win, Eleanor," Robert assured me. "But they can bleed us dry trying. We have to shut this down, immediately, irrevocably." Our strategy for the final court appearance was to combine all previous victories into a single, devastating declaration, not a defense of my mind, but a condemnation of their actions. Robert arranged for a special, closed hearing to address the pattern of elder abuse and criminal intent. I did not physically appear in court. Instead, Robert presented a massive dossier titled The Comprehensive Audit and Criminal Record. This included the police report, the documented felony of the safe break-in, the deed transfer, proof the house was legally protected before their crime, the hidden codicil activation, proof of their forfeited inheritance, the audit, the full, detailed list of $650,000 in bailouts and payments, establishing the motive for theft, Mrs. Gable's affidavit, the emotional witness, her objective statement confirming she witnessed the pattern of neglect and verbal abuse. The victory was swift. The judge, faced with overwhelming evidence of criminal intent and chronic financial exploitation by the primary beneficiaries, immediately dismissed the petition for temporary custody with prejudice. Furthermore, the judge issued a formal, permanent restraining order against Marcus and Veronica, prohibiting them from contacting me, Helen Gable, or any of the Foundation's officers. Their legal battle was formally, definitively over. That evening, I was sitting with Mrs. Gable in the quiet sanctuary of the mountain cottage, celebrating with a slice of the very cake that had saved my life, Grandma's sour cream coffee cake. "It's over, Eleanor," Helen said, her face relaxed for the first time in months. "They can't touch you now. They can't touch the house." I looked at her, and the final piece of my arc clicked into place. I had spent so long fighting for the money, I had forgotten why I was fighting at all. It wasn't about the debt or the house. It was about the dignity they had tried to steal. I felt a profound sense of catharsis. I no longer needed to cling to the anger. I repeated my core revelation, now fully embodied. I did not lose my autonomy. I found the courage to expose their theft. The legal fight was over, but the wisdom had just begun. The only thing left was to permanently step into the new life I had forged, far away from the shadows of my past mistakes. I was ready to close the final, empowering chapter of my story. The final judgment had been issued, dismissing the petition for temporary custody and issuing a permanent restraining order against Marcus and Veronica. The criminal charges stemming from the safe break-in were still pending, ensuring that their consequences were lasting and immediate. I was legally and financially free. The only thing left was the reclamation of self, the ultimate journey from the wounded mother to the autonomous woman. I chose to live at the mountain cottage for a full 6 months, savoring the silence and the space. The Tudor revival, my former gilded cage, was flourishing under Helen Gable's stewardship. She ran it as a beautifully preserved bed and breakfast, using the proceeds to maintain the home Charles had built. I visited only once, bringing Helen fresh flowers. The house felt warm and welcoming, finally free of the cold tension Marcus and Veronica had brought. My new life, the vivid list of simple, genuine joys, was unfolding. The Garden of Autonomy. My days were spent not worrying about bailouts, but about soil. I spent hours planting a massive vegetable patch with Helen at the cottage, focused on the tangible, honest results of my labor. The growth of the tomatoes and peppers was a simple, beautiful metaphor for the growth of my own spirit. The art of freedom. I rediscovered my love for watercolor painting. I focused entirely on landscapes, mountains and clear skies, a visual rejection of the cluttered, anxious interiors of my past. I painted to please no one but myself. The legacy of character. The Charles and Eleanor Sterling Charitable Foundation was fully operational. We used the $6.8 million to launch a scholarship program focusing on financial literacy and entrepreneurial ethics for young adults. We called the program the Anti-Entitlement Initiative. The first lesson we taught was the difference between earning a legacy and seizing an asset. The foundation was my final act, the ultimate, irreversible testament to my new values. The money would never fall into the hands of those who hadn't earned it. My relationship with Marcus was permanently severed. The restraining order ensured the physical separation, but the emotional separation was what mattered. I received a final, desperate letter from him, smuggled to me through a neutral third party, a letter of accusation, not apology. He claimed I had destroyed the family legacy and chosen a recipe over my own son. His words no longer hurt. They were simply confirming data. They were the final, objective proof that the entitlement was too deeply rooted to be salvaged. I stood on the mountain porch one crisp autumn morning, overlooking the valley, and delivered my final monologue to the wind. The sun was warm on my face, and the air smelled of pine and damp earth. I spent 40 years living by a thesis that was built on fear. A mother's peace is worth any lie. I believed that by lying about the safe combination, by lying about my capacity, I could keep my family intact. But a family built on lies is just a monument to deceit, and the lie I told myself only enabled their greed. I closed my eyes, recalling the moment of the recipe swap, the moment I chose courage over comfort. The ultimate betrayal, the break-in, the promissory note, the attempt to have me declared incompetent, it was all necessary. It forced me to stop being a caretaker of my wealth and start being the architect of my own life. I did not lose my children. I simply let go of the illusion that they were worth saving from themselves. I smiled, a genuine, deep smile of peace. My antithesis is final, forged in the fire of their betrayal. I did not lose my autonomy. I found the courage to expose their theft. The recipe was not a joke. It was a profound truth. The deed to my soul, my autonomy, was never in the safe. It was within me. And the most valuable thing I ever protected was not the Tudor revival, but my legal right to tell the truth. I am Eleanor, and I am finally, completely, the owner of myself. I turned and walked back inside, ready to bake another coffee cake. The sweetest, most meaningful victory of my life. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe to Voice of Jenna so you never miss the next chapter in our world of twists, lessons, and unforgettable moments. Your support means the world to me, and trust me, the stories only get better from here.